So now let's talk about logistically how these games actually work. Okay, so if you're actually at a slot machine, how does it determine who's going to win and who is going to lose? Well, if you go back, 50 years or 80 years when Vegas was new and these slot machine games were, not very sophisticated, a lot of it was pretty close to random. It was a random number generator that was created. And sometimes the games were actually not so random. Sometimes the game actually was on a schedule where it would eventually pay off in set increments. Well, games have changed a lot over time. And it turns out today that in regards to determining payouts, the moment you make a bet or spin the reels, if you will, your payout is fully determined. And it literally is based on timing. So you can kind of imagine that, since the last spin, maybe there's been 4 seconds. Well, depending on exactly when you press the button will determine what your payout is. So it's literally based on timing. Some players have actually, in the past, figured out a way to manipulate that timing. It turns out that the game was random, well, but not purely random. It was approximating randomness. These machines use random number generators, basically using computers to randomly generate numbers. And if you know much about computers, you know that creating true randomness is actually impossible. True randomness is kind of like a theoretical extreme that you never really approach. It's kind of like infinity. You never really can fully imagine infinity. Infinity maybe doesn't really exist. Same thing with randomness. There's really no way to create fictional randomness, okay? And so some people have actually figured out the system, and there's this famous story of some people from Russia coming over to the United States and figuring out a way to time these machines. That these types of opportunities have virtually gone away, but you can imagine that there's somebody out there right now trying to figure out the next way to cheat these systems. So anyway, when you're playing one of these games, as soon as you press it, the win is determined. And a lot of times you play these games, you press a button, you get some bonus, and it leads you into some sub-bonus, and the whole spin might take 5 minutes or even 10 minutes in some cases. It's all about the theatrics. But in reality, when you press that button, the entire payout is already determined. That's just the way these things work, okay? So that makes it, at this point in time, really impossible to game the system. That being said, there are some games that are a little bit different, okay? For most games, each spin is independent. So each time you press that button, what's happened the press before is completely irrelevant, all right? And this is probably true for, maybe 85 to 90% of games at casinos, if I had to guess, are like this, where the game is independent. So if you've heard somebody saying, that slot machine hasn't paid out in a while, it's due, that doesn't really make any sense. That's not consistent with the math. And if you've heard somebody say, well, that machine's been paying out, you want to keep playing it, that also doesn't make any sense. It's all random, all right, or at least very close to random, and it's all independent. So if you win the last hand, that doesn't change whether or not you're going to win the very next hand, okay? All right, so that is true for most games. There are some games, however, that feature more like a conditional probability, where the payout for the game actually changes over time. In the industry, these are called variable state games. So the state of the game, the condition the game is in, changes over time. It's variable. So that means that the EV, both for the player and the casino, changes over time. And in most cases, these changes are observable for the player. What I mean by that is, it's not that the machine is just sort of randomly deciding when it's going to be paying off and when it's not going to be paying off. No. The game is going to show you something about itself that allows the player to ascertain something about the current EV. So for example, there are progressive jackpot machines. And if you go to a casino, you'll see these. These are actually like I was sort of alluding to before, that there's actually a decent amount of these. So maybe if 85 to 90% of games are just random, independent events when you play them, that leaves a sizable chunk of games that are like this. And these progressive machines are actually pretty common. So you'll often see, if you walk up to a slot machine at the top, there's some big number, $300,000 or something, and that number is growing over time. Basically, it's building up a big jackpot, and the higher that jackpot is, the better the EV is for the player. And it's actually possible that the jackpot gets so high that it switches to become a game that has a positive EV for the player. Okay, so these games are pretty interesting. And I'm just going to put up here, there are others. There's no way to go through all these different games. There are so many different slot machines that it's kind of silly to try to list out games that are different. But I'm going to give you one specific example of a game that doesn't really have a progressive jackpot. Those are kind of boring to do the math for. But I'm going to talk about one game from Harley Davidson. The motorcycle company. They have a pretty interesting slot game that I'm going to show you guys in the next video. I'm going to show you how it actually is played in the next video, but for now I'm going to show you the math of how this game can actually switch to having a positive player advantage. So if you're interested in advantage plays, where the player figures out a way to have a positive advantage, we saw that in blackjack, right? When we're talking about counting cards, you can actually have a positive player advantage if you're strategic. You're going to see it again now. Harley Davidson is a slot machine game that is theoretically beatable. So if you walk up to one of these games, you're going to see that they have a free game bonus. And it's going to look a little something like this. There's going to be a mega jackpot, a maxi jackpot, and a mini jackpot. Right, and when you walk up to the machine, it's going to look kind of like this, and then it'll have some numbers in here. And what those numbers represent is the number of spins you'll get if you hit one of these bonuses. Okay, and like I said, in the next video, I'm actually going to show you this game being played. All right, but it's a regular slot machine game where you play the game, and it's got spinning wheels. It's an automated computer game where the wheels are spinning. But if you get the bonus, these are the spins you're going to get. So if you hit the mega in this scenario, you're going to get 12 free games, right? 12 free spins. And when you win, they're going to pay out 3 times what they normally would. Okay? So what makes this game one of those variable state games is as you play, these values go up over time. So if it's been a while since one of these has hit, these numbers will go up. So you can kind of imagine that as these numbers rise, that is better and better for the player and worse for the casino. And ultimately, the casino doesn't really so much care because it's engineered so that it'll have that 6 to 12% house advantage. But at certain moments, the game may flip and have a really big player advantage instead. So there have been people that have actually figured out the math behind this. All right, and I'm going to give you an example that comes straight from the Wizard of Odds. I'll link to that in the notes for this video. But the Wizard of Odds highlights a game that looks like this, a very high payout at each of these levels. And somebody actually went in and figured out what the expected return is on this game. Okay? So I'm just going to show you an equation. I hate having to teach this using these videos because this is so much more interesting in person when we can play the game a little bit. Show some people hitting jackpots. And I can answer questions, but it is what it is. All right, and so this is the equation that shows the expected return for this game. In the worksheet for today's lecture, I'm going to give you some practice problems where you're working through this, and this is the only math that comes from today's lecture. The expected return then can be expressed, to be clear, when I say expected return, this is how much of your money you would expect to get back as a player. So if the expected return is 100%, that means there's no house advantage, okay? If the expected return is 95%, that would mean there's a 5% house advantage. And if the expected return is 102%, that would mean a 2% player advantage, okay? And so this approximates the expected return for this game. All right, so let's think about what all of these numbers mean. First of all, you've got this one here, just 80.18%. That's the expected return if these didn't exist at all, okay? That's the constant. If you never hit these, this is your expected return. So in fact, if you sat down at one of these machines and you played 100 times and you never got any of these bonuses, well, that would be your expected return, okay? These percentages here represent the return when you hit one of these. Right? It represents the expected gains in your expected return from hitting these. And that's a function of the payouts. So in this case, then if you hit the mega, you get 97 free spins. So that is 97 times better than just getting one free spin, okay? And so these percentages here represent how much it boosts the expected return, okay? So the mini, you get about a 0.4% boost per the number of spins you get. So if we take this 0.3858% and we multiply it times 23, I think you get about 8.8734%. And so your expected return jumps up by about 8.9% because of these 23 spins. The maxi boosts at 0.25% for each extra spin you are expecting to get here. And for the mini, or excuse me, for the mega, it's a lower amount. And so what's kind of confusing here is that the mini exerts a bigger influence, right? The mini exerts a bigger influence on the expected return. The reason for that is you hit the mini way more often. So although the mega has a much bigger effect, if you hit the mega, it's a bigger deal. You're hitting the mini way more often. So actually, this number here is the most important of these options available to you here. So what you would do is if you go through all of this, you would find that the expected return is 105.8%. All right, so that means this game has a 5.8% player advantage at this moment in time. So the EV for the player on a $1 bet, for example, would be 5.8 cents. And so there are advantage players in Las Vegas that will actually walk around looking for games like this. I'm giving you just one example with Harley Davidson, but there's other types of games that are similar to this where you can actually figure out when it has a positive player advantage. In the industry, they call this vulturing, which is walking around looking for a game that has a positive expected payout. So we'll see that now with video poker, and we may make reference to this too. We see this now with slots. We may make reference to this too when we talk about video poker. It also sometimes gives you a positive player advantage.